On August 4th, the eyes of two nations will be fixed on a single courtroom in South Africa. This is not just a legal battle. It's a fight over the dignity, legacy, and final resting place of former President Edgar Lungu. Will his body be returned to Zambia for burial or remain in South Africa under court order? The Lungu family, the Zambian government, and the South African judiciary are locked in a standoff that could reshape Zambia's political landscape. Today, we break down the case, the players, and what's really at stake. On August 4th, 2025, the South African High Court will deliver a verdict that could end one of the most controversial political and legal battles in Zambia's recent history. Former President Edgar Lungu's body remains in South Africa, sparking a dispute between his family and the Zambian government over where and how he should be buried. In this video, we examine the case, the courtroom drama, and the high-stakes political implications. Will Lungu finally return home, or will the decision keep his remains in South Africa? Watch until the end for all the details and possible outcomes. The August 4th verdict. The death of Edgar Lungu, Zambia's sixth president, on June 5, 2025, in a South African hospital marked the beginning of an unprecedented legal and political controversy that has gripped Zambia and South Africa. Lungu, who served as president from 2015 to 2021, passed away at the age of 68 after receiving treatment for an undisclosed illness. His death, while a moment of national mourning in Zambia, quickly escalated into a bitter dispute between his family and the Zambian government, led by his successor, President Hakainde Hichilema. The core of the conflict revolves around where and how Lungu's body should be laid to rest, with the Zambian government insisting on a state funeral in Lusaka and the Lungu family advocating for a private burial in South Africa. This dispute culminated in a significant legal showdown in the Pretoria High Court, with a pivotal hearing scheduled for August 4, 2025. The court's decision on this date is expected to determine whether Lungu's body will be repatriated to Zambia for a state funeral or remain in South Africa for a private burial as per his family's wishes. The August 4th verdict is not merely a legal ruling. It is a flashpoint that encapsulates deep-seated political rivalries, questions of national tradition versus personal wishes, and the broader implications for Zambia's political and social fabric. The controversy has drawn international attention, highlighting the complex interplay between personal dignity, national protocol, and political legacies in post-colonial African states. It has also exposed the fragility of Zambia's political reconciliation efforts, as the feud between Lungu and Hichilema, which defined their relationship during Lungu's lifetime, continues to shape events even after his death. This analysis delves into the reasons behind Lungu's body remaining in South Africa, the positions of the key stakeholders, the legal arguments presented in court, the political ramifications for Zambia, the possible outcomes of the August 4th verdict, public reactions in both Zambia and South Africa, and a forward-looking assessment of what might happen next. Why Lungu's body is in South Africa. Edgar Lungu's presence in South Africa at the time of his death was not a mere coincidence, but a reflection of his personal and political circumstances in the final years of his life. Lungu had a history of health issues, notably achalasia, a condition affecting the esophagus, which required specialized treatment. In 2015, he collapsed during a public event in Lusaka and subsequently underwent surgery in Pretoria, South Africa, to address a narrowed esophagus. His health challenges persisted, and in early 2025, he traveled to South Africa for further medical treatment, reportedly due to complications from an undisclosed illness. The decision to seek treatment abroad was influenced by more than medical necessity. Lungu's family and supporters have alleged that his health deteriorated due to political persecution by the Hichilema administration. After losing the 2021 presidential election to Hichilema, Lungu faced significant challenges, including the revocation of his retirement benefits after he re-entered active politics in 2023. The Zambian government justified this move by citing Lungu's return to frontline politics as a violation of the privileges accorded to former presidents. However, Lungu's family argues that this revocation forced him to rely on financial support from family and friends, compelling him to seek medical treatment in South Africa due to fears of politically motivated negligence in Zambia's healthcare system. Following his death on June 5, 2025, Lungu's body remained in South Africa, held in a morgue in Johannesburg, as his family resisted the Zambian government's efforts to repatriate. The family's decision was rooted in Lungu's explicit instructions, as conveyed by their spokesperson, Makibi Zulu, that Hichilema should not be involved in his funeral arrangements. This stance was a direct response to the long-standing animosity between Lungu and Hichilema, which included Hichilema's imprisonment for over 100 days on treason charges in 2017 during Lungu's presidency. The family's insistence on a private burial in South Africa was also influenced by their belief that a state funeral in Zambia would be politicized, undermining Lungu's dignity and legacy. The Zambian government's attempts to take control of the funeral arrangements further complicated the situation. Despite initial negotiations that suggested a compromise for a state funeral, relations broke down when the family accused the government of deviating from agreed terms, particularly regarding Hichilema's role in the proceedings. On June 25, 2025, just hours before a planned private burial in Johannesburg, the Pretoria High Court issued an injunction, following an urgent application by Zambian Attorney General Mulalo Kabesha, halting the burial pending a final decision on the location. This legal intervention ensured that Lungu's body remained in in South Africa, setting the stage for the August 4th hearing. The prolonged stay of Lungu's body in South Africa has also raised questions about transparency and accountability. Some Zambian commentators, as reported by the Zambian Observer, have expressed skepticism about the circumstances of Lungu's death, noting that the family's refusal to allow public viewing of the body has fueled speculation about its authenticity. This controversy has added another layer of complexity to the dispute, as it intertwines with broader issues of trust in governance and public perception of the former president's legacy. The Lungu family's position. The Lungu family's position is anchored in their commitment to honoring Edgar Lungu's final wishes and protecting his dignity in death. According to family spokesperson Makibi Zulu, Lungu explicitly instructed that President Hichilema should not be involved in his funeral arrangements, reflecting the deep personal and political rift between the two leaders. The family's decision to pursue a private burial in South Africa is driven by several key factors. Respect for Lungu's wishes. The family asserts that Lungu's instructions were clear. He did not want his funeral to be presided over by Hichilema or conducted under the current Zambian administration. This stance is rooted in Lungu's experiences of alleged persecution, including the revocation of his retirement benefits, restrictions on his movement, and accusations of politically motivated medical negligence. The family believes that a state funeral in Zambia would disrespect these wishes and subject Lungu's legacy to political manipulation. Legal authority under South African law. The family argues that, under South African law, the surviving spouse, former First Lady Esther Lungu, has the legal right to determine her husband's burial arrangements. They contend that the Zambian government's attempts to assert authority over Lungu's remains are legally unfounded and violate their constitutional rights to dignity, family life, and cultural practices. The family's legal team has emphasized that Zambian protocols, such as the tradition of burying former presidents at Embassy Park in Lusaka, have no extraterritorial effect in South Africa. Emotional and financial distress. The family has sought a cost order against the Zambian government for the emotional and financial distress caused by the cancellation of the planned burial on June 25, 2025. They argue that the government's last-minute legal intervention disrupted arrangements that had already incurred significant costs, including funeral home services, venue hire, transport, clergy, and security. The family views this as an additional act of harassment, compounding the pain of their loss. Protection against political hostility. The family's decision to bury Lungu in South Africa is also framed as a protective measure against the political hostility they faced in Zambia. They cite the government's actions against Lungu and his associates, including corruption charges against Esther Lungu and their children, as evidence of a targeted campaign. The family believes that a burial in Zambia would expose them to further humiliation and prevent a dignified farewell. Support from South African authorities. The family has noted that the South African government has respected their decision to hold a private burial in South Africa, as evidenced by formal communications submitted to the court. This support bolsters their argument that their choice aligns with international norms and the host country's legal framework. The family's position has been articulated through public statements and legal submissions, with their lawyer, Makibi Zulu, delivering a robust defense in court. On August 4, 2025, Zulu argued that the Zambian government's claim to Lungu's remains was inconsistent with its treatment of him as an ordinary citizen during his lifetime. He highlighted the government's denial of Lungu's retirement benefits, restrictions on his travel, and failure to provide adequate medical support as evidence of their lack of moral authority to dictate his burial arrangements. The family's stance has resonated with Lungu's supporters, particularly members of the Patriotic Front (PF) party, who view the dispute as a continuation of the Hichilema administration's alleged vendetta against Lungu. However, it has also drawn criticism from some Zambians, who argue that the family's refusal to repatriate Lungu's body denies the nation an opportunity to collectively mourn a former head of state. Government's legal stand. The Zambian government, represented by Attorney General Mulalo Kabesha, has taken a firm stance on the need to repatriate Edgar Lungu's body for a state funeral in Lusaka. Their legal arguments, presented in the Pretoria High Court, are grounded in national tradition, legal precedent, and the concept of public interest. Key elements of the government's position include national interest and tradition. The government argues that, as a former president, Edgar Lungu is a national figure whose burial should be handled by the state to reflect his status and contributions to Zambia. They cite the precedent of founding President Kenneth Kaunda, whose family's wishes to bury him next to his wife were overruled in 2021 in favor of a state burial at Embassy Park in Lusaka. The government contends that this precedent establishes that national interest supersedes personal or family preferences for former heads of state. Zambian law and protocol. The government asserts that Zambian law and protocol mandate that former presidents be buried with full military honors at a designated site, Embassy Park, to honor their service to the nation. Attorney General Kabesha has argued that Lungu's status as a former president makes him national property, and his burial should be a public event that allows all Zambians to pay their respects. The government has prepared a grave for Lungu at Embassy Park, reinforcing their commitment to this tradition. Legal authority in South Africa. In their court filings, the government seeks declaratory relief to establish their right to repatriate Lungu's body. They argue that, despite Lungu's death in South Africa, his status as a former Zambian president gives the government a legitimate claim to to his remains. Kabesha has emphasized that negotiations with the family are ongoing, but the state's position is that a state funeral is the most fitting outcome. Response to family's claims. The government disputes the family's allegations of persecution, denying that Lungu was prevented from traveling or accessing medical care. They argue that his retirement benefits were lawfully suspended due to his return to active politics, a decision upheld by Zambian law. The government also challenges the family's claim that no agreement was reached for a state funeral, pointing to earlier negotiations where the family agreed to Hichilema presiding over the ceremony before retracting their consent. Public closure and dignity. The government maintains that a state funeral in Zambia would provide closure for the nation and ensure that Lungu is honored in a manner befitting his legacy. They argue that allowing a private burial in South Africa would set a precedent that undermines Zambia's sovereignty and traditions, potentially creating confusion for future presidential funerals. The government's legal stand has been supported by some Zambian commentators and officials who view the state's role as essential in preserving national unity and protocol. However, it has faced criticism for appearing to disregard Lungu's personal wishes and for escalating a sensitive family matter into a public and international dispute. The government's insistence on involving Hichilema in the funeral proceedings, despite Lungu's explicit instructions, has been a particular point of contention, fueling accusations of political posturing. Inside the South African court battle. The legal battle in the Pretoria High Court is a complex and emotionally charged affair, pitting the Zambian government against Lungu's family in a dispute that transcends national borders. The court's involvement began on June 25, 2025, when the Zambian government filed an urgent application to halt Lungu's planned burial in Johannesburg, just hours before the ceremony was set to take place. The court granted an interim injunction, agreed upon by both parties, to postpone the burial until a final decision could be made on August 4, 2025. Key developments in the court case. June 25, 2025. Interim injunction. The Pretoria High Court issued an order preventing Lungu's burial in South Africa, following the Zambian government's request. The court set deadlines for both parties to submit their papers. The government was given until July 4th to file an amended notice of motion, and the family until July 11th to submit opposing papers. This decision disrupted a funeral service at the Cathedral of Christ the King in Johannesburg, leaving mourners, including Lungu's widow and daughter, in distress. July 25, 2025. Additional applicant. Zimbabwean journalist Simbarash Chikanza, founder of Zimai Media, applied to join the case as a co-applicant, arguing that Lungu's burial in South Africa could set a precedent affecting regional stability. Chikanza claimed that media misinformation and identity fraud syndicates within the South African Broadcasting Corporation, SABC, were influencing the case, a claim that added a layer of complexity to the proceedings. July 29, 2025. Family's cost order request. The Lungu family filed submissions seeking a cost order against the Zambian government, arguing that the cancellation of the June 25th burial caused significant emotional and financial distress. They detailed expenses incurred for funeral arrangements and emphasized Esther Lungu's legal authority under South African law to determine her husband's burial. August 4, 2025. Final hearing. The Pretoria High Court is set to deliver its verdict on August 4, 2025, determining whether Lungu's body will be repatriated to Zambia or buried in South Africa. The hearing has drawn significant attention, with both sides presenting robust arguments. The family's lawyer, Makibi Zulu, has challenged the government's moral and legal authority, while Attorney General Kabesha has emphasized national interest and precedent. Legal arguments. Family's arguments. The family's legal team argues that the Zambian government's application is legally unsustainable under South African law, as it seeks to enforce Zambian protocols that lack extraterritorial jurisdiction. They assert that Esther Lungu's rights as the surviving spouse take precedence, and that the government's actions violate the family's constitutional rights to dignity and cultural practices. The family also disputes the government's claim of an agreement for a state funeral, pointing to inconsistencies in official documents. Government's arguments. The Zambian government relies on the precedent set by Kenneth Kanda's burial, arguing that national interest supersedes personal wishes for former presidents. They seek a court order to repatriate Lungu's body, emphasizing that a state funeral in Zambia is mandated by law and tradition. The government also argues that Lungu's status as a former president makes his burial a matter of public interest, necessitating state involvement. Third-party involvement. Simbarash Chikanza's intervention introduced an unexpected dimension, with his affidavit warning of regional implications if Lungu is buried in South Africa. His claims about media misinformation and identity fraud have been met with skepticism, but have added to the public discourse surrounding the case. Court dynamics. The Pretoria High Court's handling of the case reflects its role as a neutral arbiter in a highly politicized dispute. The court's decision to grant an interim injunction on June 25 demonstrates its sensitivity to the urgency of the matter, while the scheduling of a full hearing on August 4 indicates a commitment to a thorough examination of the legal issues. The involvement of South African authorities, including Foreign Minister Ronald Lamola, who met with Hichilema on June 22 to mediate, underscores the diplomatic dimensions of the case. The court battle has also highlighted the challenges of navigating cross-border legal disputes, particularly when they involve national pride and personal grief. The August 4 verdict is expected expected to set a precedent for how similar disputes are handled in the future, both in South Africa and across the Southern African Development Community (SADC) region. Political implications for Zambia. The dispute over Edgar Lungu's burial has far-reaching political implications for Zambia, exacerbating existing tensions and raising questions about governance, reconciliation, and national unity. The feud between Lungu and Hichilema, which began during their time as political rivals, has been a defining feature of Zambian politics for over a decade. This section explores the key political ramifications of the dispute. Deepening political divisions. The burial controversy has deepened the divide between supporters of the ruling United Party for National Development (UPND) and the opposition Patriotic Front (PF). Lungu remained a significant figure in the PF even after his 2021 election loss, and his death has galvanized his supporters, who view the government's actions as an extension of a vendetta against him. The PF has accused the Hichilema administration of using the funeral dispute to marginalize the party and suppress its political influence ahead of the 2026 presidential election. Conversely, UPND supporters argue that the government's insistence on a state funeral is a matter of national protocol and not a political maneuver. They point to the precedent of Kenneth Kanda's burial as evidence that the state has a legitimate role in honoring former presidents. However, the government's decision to involve Hichilema in the funeral proceedings, despite Lungu's explicit wishes, has fueled perceptions of insensitivity and political opportunism. Impact on Hichilema's leadership. The dispute has placed President Hichilema in a delicate position. His administration has sought to project an image of democratic renewal and anti-corruption, but the handling of Lungu's funeral has drawn criticism for appearing heavy-handed. The decision to pursue legal action in South Africa, rather than resolving the matter through dialogue, has been seen by some as an overreach that undermines Zambia's diplomatic relations with South Africa and the broader SADC region. Hichilema's history with Lungu, particularly the 2017 treason charges, continues to cast a shadow over his presidency. The burial dispute has reignited debates about his treatment of political opponents, with Lungu supporters accusing him of targeting the former president and his family through corruption charges and other measures. How Hichilema navigates the fallout from the August 4th verdict will be critical to his ability to maintain public trust and political stability. Regional and international perceptions. The dispute has also drawn attention from regional and international observers, raising questions about Zambia's political maturity and adherence to democratic norms. South Africa's involvement, both as the host country for Lungu's body and as a mediator through Foreign Minister Ronald Lamola, underscores the regional implications of the controversy. The SADC region, which has faced similar disputes over the burials of former leaders, is closely watching the outcome, as it could influence protocols for handling such cases in the future. Internationally, the dispute has highlighted the challenges of balancing personal wishes with national interests in post-colonial states. The involvement of a Zimbabwean journalist, Simbarash Chikanza, in the court case has further internationalized the issue, with his claims of media misinformation adding a layer of complexity to the narrative. The August 4th verdict could shape perceptions of Zambia's commitment to respecting individual rights versus upholding state tradition. Long-term political legacy. The handling of Lungu's funeral could have lasting implications for Zambia's political landscape. A state funeral in Zambia, if conducted respectfully, could provide an opportunity for national reconciliation, allowing Zambians to collectively mourn a former leader. However, if the government is perceived as forcing its will on the family, it risks alienating a significant portion of the population and strengthening the PF's narrative of victimhood. Conversely, a private burial in South Africa could be seen as a victory for individual rights, but may be interpreted as a rejection of Zambian sovereignty and tradition. This outcome could embolden opposition movements and fuel speculation about Lungu's death, potentially destabilizing the political environment. The August 4th verdict will play a critical role in shaping these dynamics and determining whether Zambia can move toward closure or further division. Possible outcomes on August 4th. The Pretoria High Court's verdict on August 4th, 2025 will determine the final resting place of Edgar Lungu's body and have significant implications for Zambia, South Africa, and the broader region. Several possible outcomes are conceivable, each with its own set of consequences. Repatriation to Zambia for a state funeral. Scenario: the court rules in favor of the Zambian government, granting their request to repatriate Lungu's body for a state funeral at Embassy Park in Lusaka. The government organizes a ceremony with full military honors, presided over by President Hichilema or another designated official. Implications: this outcome would reinforce the government's argument that national interest supersedes personal wishes, aligning with the precedent set by Kenneth Kanda's burial. It could provide closure for Zambians who wish to mourn Lungu collectively, but risks alienating his family and supporters, who may view it as a violation of his wishes. The government would need to handle the funeral sensitively to avoid accusations of political manipulation. Challenges: the family could appeal the decision, prolonging the dispute and further straining relations. Public protests or unrest, particularly from PF supporters, are possible if the funeral is perceived as disrespectful to Lungu's legacy. Private burial in South Africa. Scenario: the court rules in favor of the Lungu family, allowing them to proceed with a private burial in South Africa. The family organizes a ceremony in Johannesburg in line with Lungu's wishes, potentially with support from South African authorities. Implications: this outcome would uphold the family's rights under South African law and honor Lungu's instructions, providing closure for his immediate circle. However, it could be seen as a rejection of Zambian tradition, potentially sparking backlash from those who believe Lungu should be buried in his homeland. The government may organize a memorial service in Zambia to mitigate public discontent. Challenges: the decision could fuel speculation about the authenticity of Lungu's death, as some Zambians have demanded verification of his body. It may also strain Zambia-South Africa relations, particularly if the government perceives South Africa as undermining its sovereignty. Negotiated compromise scenario: the court encourages both parties to reach a compromise, such as a state funeral in Zambia with limited involvement from Hichilema, or a hybrid ceremony that respects both national protocol and the family's wishes. This could involve a memorial service in South Africa, followed by repatriation for a state burial. Implications: a compromise would be the most diplomatic outcome, potentially easing tensions and allowing both sides to save face. It could facilitate national reconciliation and demonstrate Zambia's ability to navigate sensitive issues through dialogue. South Africa's mediation efforts could play a key role in brokering such an agreement. Challenges: reaching a compromise requires mutual trust, which has been eroded by the ongoing dispute. The family's insistence on excluding Hichilema and the government's commitment to protocol may make agreement difficult. Any compromise would need to carefully balance dignity and national interests. Delayed decision or further legal proceedings. Scenario: the court determines that additional evidence or hearings are needed, delaying the final verdict beyond August 4. This could occur if new legal issues, such as Chikanza's claims, require further examination. Implications: a delay would prolong the uncertainty surrounding Lungu's burial, exacerbating emotional distress for his family and confusion among Zambians. It could also escalate political tensions, as both sides may use the interim period to rally support and intensify their narratives. Challenges: a prolonged dispute risks turning Lungu's death into a symbol of division, undermining efforts at national healing. It could also strain judicial resources in South Africa and complicate diplomatic relations. Each outcome carries significant risks and opportunities, and the court's decision will need to balance legal principles, cultural sensitivities, and political realities. The involvement of South African authorities and the international community may influence the final resolution, particularly if the verdict has regional implications. Public reactions in Zambia and South Africa. The dispute over Edgar Lungu's burial has elicited strong reactions in both Zambia and South Africa, reflecting the polarized views on the issue. Public sentiment has been shaped by media coverage, political affiliations, and cultural attitudes toward death and national pride. Zambia. In Zambia, reactions are deeply divided along political lines, with the PF and UPND camps framing the dispute in ways that align with their respective narratives. PF supporters, Lungu supporters, particularly within the PF, view the government's actions as a continuation of Hichilema's alleged persecution of Lungu. They argue that the family's right to honor Lungu's wishes should take precedence, and that a state funeral risks politicizing his death. Social media posts and statements from PF leaders have accused the government of disrespecting Lungu's legacy and harassing his family. Some supporters have called for protests if the body is forcibly repatriated. UPND supporters of the ruling UPND argue that a state funeral is a matter of national pride and tradition, allowing Zambians to collectively honor a former president. They point to the precedent of Kenneth Kaunda and other former leaders buried at Embassy Park. Some have criticized the Lungu family for denying Zambians the opportunity to mourn, with comments on platforms like the Zambian Observer suggesting that the family's actions are driven by political motives. General public. Beyond partisan lines, many Zambians express frustration at the ongoing dispute, longing for closure and a dignified farewell for Lungu. The lack of transparency, particularly the family's refusal to allow public viewing of the body, has fueled speculation and conspiracy theories, with some questioning whether Lungu is truly deceased. Public opinion, as reported by outlets like the Zambian Observer, reflects a desire for the truth and an end to the conflict. Civil society and media. Civil society organizations and media outlets have called for dialogue and respect for both the family's wishes and national traditions. Some commentators, such as constitutional lawyer John Sangwa, have advocated for clearer laws on presidential funerals to prevent similar disputes in the future. Others, like Brian Matambo, have condemned the government's actions as an attack on the family's dignity, urging the public to demand accountability. South Africa. In South Africa, the dispute has been viewed through the lens of legal rights, diplomatic relations, and regional dynamics. Public sympathy for the family. Many South Africans, particularly those aware of Lungu's medical treatment in their country, sympathize with the family's desire for a private burial. The court's decision to halt the June 25th burial was met with mixed reactions, with some expressing frustration at the disruption of a solemn event. Mourners at the Cathedral of Christ the King in Johannesburg, where a memorial service was held, were reportedly shocked and saddened by the last-minute cancellation. Media and political commentary. South African media outlets, such as SABC News, have covered the dispute extensively, framing it as a clash between personal rights and national protocol. The involvement of Zimbabwean journalist Simbarash Chikanza, who accused SABC contributors of misinformation, has sparked debates about media ethics and regional influence. Some commentators have warned that the dispute could strain South Africa-Zambia relations, particularly if the court's ruling is perceived as favoring one side over the other. Government stance. The South African government, through Foreign Minister Ronald Lamola, has adopted a neutral stance, emphasizing respect for the family's wishes while acknowledging the importance of a state funeral for Zambia. Lamola's visit to Zambia on June 22 to mediate reflects South Africa's desire to avoid being drawn into a diplomatic conflict. However, the government's confirmation of support for the family's decision to bury Lungu in South Africa has been cited by the family as evidence of their legal standing. Regional implications. The dispute has resonated with South Africans familiar with similar controversies in the SADC region, such as the burial of Zimbabwe's Oliver Mtukudzi, where family wishes clashed with state interests. Some South Africans have expressed concern that allowing Lungu's burial in their country could set a precedent for other regional leaders, potentially complicating land and cultural issues. The public reactions in both countries underscore the emotional and political weight of the dispute. In Zambia, the focus is on national pride and closure, while in South Africa, the emphasis is on legal rights and regional diplomacy. The August 4th verdict is likely to intensify these sentiments, regardless of the outcome. Final analysis. What happens next? The August 4th verdict will mark a turning point in the Edgar Lungu burial dispute, but its implications will extend far beyond the immediate decision. The outcome will shape Zambia's political landscape, influence South Africa-Zambia relations, and set a precedent for handling similar disputes in the region. This final analysis explores the potential paths forward and the broader implications for all stakeholders. Immediate aftermath. If the court rules for repatriation, a state funeral in Zambia could provide an opportunity for national mourning, but risks escalating tensions if the family and PF supporters feel their wishes have been disregarded. The government would need to ensure that the ceremony is inclusive and respectful, possibly by limiting Hichilema's role or involving neutral figures, such as religious leaders or former presidents. The PF may organize parallel memorial events to maintain their narrative, potentially leading to public demonstrations. If the court rules for a private burial, a burial in South Africa would honor Lungu's wishes but could deepen divisions in Zambia, with some viewing it as a rejection of national identity. The government may respond by organizing a national memorial service to provide closure, but this could be boycotted by Lungu's supporters. The family would need to navigate ongoing speculation about Lungu's death, possibly by allowing limited verification to quell conspiracy theories. If a compromise is reached, a negotiated settlement, such as a hybrid ceremony, would be the most constructive outcome, allowing both sides to honor Lungu while addressing national interests. This would require significant diplomatic efforts, possibly involving South African mediators or SADC representatives. The success of a compromise depends on both parties' willingness to prioritize dignity over political point scoring. Long-term implications. Political reconciliation in Zambia. The dispute has exposed the deep wounds of Zambia's political rivalries, particularly between the UPND and PF. A resolution that respects both the family's wishes and national traditions could pave the way for reconciliation, but a heavy-handed approach by either side risks perpetuating division. The government's handling of the aftermath will be critical to its legitimacy and ability to unite the country ahead of the 2026 election. Legal and policy reforms. The controversy has highlighted the need for clearer laws on the funerals of former presidents in Zambia. Constitutional lawyer John Sangwa's call for legislation to outline these arrangements could gain traction, prompting reforms to prevent future disputes. Such laws would need to balance individual rights with national interests, possibly drawing on international best practices. Regional dynamics. The SADC region will closely watch the outcome, as it could influence protocols for handling the deaths of former leaders abroad. South Africa's role as a neutral arbiter strengthens its position as a regional leader, but any perception of bias could strain relations with Zambia. The involvement of figures like Simbarash Chikanza underscores the need for regional cooperation to address cross-border issues. Public trust and transparency. The speculation surrounding Lungu's death, fueled by the family's refusal to allow public viewing, highlights the importance of transparency in such cases. Future efforts to resolve the dispute may involve independent verification of Lungu's body to address conspiracy theories and restore public trust. The government and family could work with neutral parties, such as religious or international organizations, to facilitate this process. Broader context. The Lungu burial dispute is a microcosm of broader challenges facing post-colonial African states, where personal, political, and national identities often collide. The tension between individual rights and state authority, as seen in the Kenneth Kaunda case, is a recurring theme across the continent. The dispute also reflects the enduring impact of political rivalries on governance, as the Lungu-Hichilema feud continues to shape Zambia's trajectory. As Zambia and South Africa await the August 4th verdict, the hope is that the resolution will prioritize dignity, unity, and respect for both Lungu's legacy and the Zambian people. The path forward will require careful navigation of legal, political, and emotional complexities, with the potential to either heal or deepen the wounds of a nation in mourning. Conclusion. The August 4th verdict dispute will not only determine Edgar Lungu's final resting place, but also shape the narrative of his legacy and Zambia's political future. Whether through repatriation, a private burial, or a compromise, the outcome must balance the competing demands of personal wishes, national pride, and regional stability. As the world watches, the resolution of this dispute will serve as a testament to Zambia's ability to honor its past while forging a path toward reconciliation and unity.